Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our series on the growth and division of New England. Today's episode continues the discussion about the Pequot War, and it also talks about a little bit of division occurring, even more than what we've discussed, amongst the Puritans. We last left off in late 1636, where the Pequot natives triggered an armed conflict by harboring Narragansett natives who had murdered John Oldham and other colonists. The English at Massachusetts Bay responded by raiding Block Island, where the Oldham murder occurred, and another Pequot village near the mouth of the Connecticut River. The Pequot shifted towards seeking native allies to help them in the war against the English. They did get a few other tribes to join their cause, but their enemies jumped in and joined the English, turning the situation into a full-blown regional war. And when you read about the Pequot War, you hear a lot about Pequots versus English. You don't realize that just like the French and Indian War, there were native tribes on both sides of that conflict. The Narragansett were enemies of the Pequots and joined the English side at the urging of their friend and former Puritan rival, Roger Williams. The Narragansett formally visited the Massachusetts Bay Colony and formed an alliance. The terms of the alliance are memorialized in Winthrop's writings. And we have if you're on the YouTube channel, you can actually see the articles, the 9 articles of peace there between the two groups. Article 2, neither party to make peace with the Pequots without the other's consent. Article 3, not to harbor the Pequots. Article 5, to return our fugitive servants. So if servants run off into the Narragansett Bay, they are to be returned by the Narragansetts. Free trade between us, Article 7. And Article 9, to continue to the posterity of both parties. Just overall an interesting agreement. Winthrop goes on to mention Plymouth's reaction to the news, Plymouth Colony's reaction. Let's have a look. The governor of Plymouth wrote to the deputy, and we had occasioned a war by provoking the Pequots and no more. And about the peace with the Narragansetts, the deputy took it ill and returned answer accordingly. So apparently the Plymouth Pilgrims were not as happy about this war. They felt that it was provoked, and we saw some of that in William Bradford's writings that we read through last week. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we're seeing the same thing from John Winthrop. Winthrop goes on to mention a man by the name of John Tilley, a Connecticut hunter whose gun, firing his gun, drew the attention of the local Pequots, who captured him, tortured him, and cut off both of his arms. John Tilley died 3 days later. The Pequots are now beginning an offensive in the Connecticut region against the English. Meanwhile, the business of the Massachusetts Bay Colony continues, and another significant character emerges in 1636. Let's have a look. One Mrs. Hutchinson, a member of the Church of Boston, a woman of a ready wit and bold spirit, brought over with her 2 dangerous errors. One, that the person of the Holy Ghost dwells in a justified person, and 2, that no sanctification can help to evidence to us our justification. So Anne Hutchinson, who would be later known for founding Rhode Island, comes over and already almost immediately stirs up some trouble in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Anne Hutchinson was a midwife who had started hosting women at her home and talking about recent sermons. She was apparently so popular that men began attending, including Governor Henry Vane. Hutchinson became so popular that eventually a division between her beliefs and many of the ministers and magistrates of the colony began to form. Hutchinson expounded the teachings of preacher John Cotton. She supported her brother-in-law, another preacher by the name of John Wheelwright, but practically every other minister in the colony she felt was wrong in their preaching. Winthrop summarizes this split. Let's have a look. The governor, Mr. Vane, a wise and godly gentleman, held, with Mr. Cotton and many others, the indwelling of the person of the Holy Ghost in a believer, and went so far beyond the rest as to maintain a personal union with the Holy Ghost. But the deputy, with the pastor and diverse others, denied both, and the question proceeded so far by disputation. Later that fall, a personal matter would require John Winthrop to return to England, and he had to return urgently. So the general court was going to give him leave until Governor Henry Vane burst into tears that he was not sure how the condition of the colony would survive if John Winthrop left. So it was decided that John Winthrop would stay. It's an interesting account of events. The colony continued to address the religious division amongst themselves, and Winthrop summarizes the situation in a recent meeting. Let's have a look. Mr. Wilson made a very sad speech of the condition of our churches and the inevitable danger of separation if these differences and alienations among brethren were not speedily remedied, and laid the blame upon these new opinions risen up amongst us, which all the magistrates, except the governor and 2 others, did confirm, and all the ministers but 2. One of those ministers being preacher John Cotton, who did not take too kindly to Mr. Wilson's speech. The gathering ends up turning into a heated debate. And it's clear that there's a great divide in the Puritan church in the Massachusetts Bay. This would be the beginning of the antinomian controversy. In March 1637, Winthrop writes that 9 men from the colony of Saybrook were giving chase to 3 Pequot natives until they were led into a 50-man ambush, killing all 9 men. Now the Pequot War spilled over to Saybrook. So the Massachusetts Bay, they're not really involved in the events going on there. They trigger this war, then they leave, then these other problems show up in Connecticut, the Saybrook colony gets drawn in, and now as winter goes on, the religious differences in the Massachusetts Bay colony continue to grow. Let's have a look at the writing. The differences in the said points of religion increased more and more, and the ministers of both sides did publicly declare their judgments in some of them, so as all men's mouths were full of them. This is a little different than the John Lyford incident in Plymouth, where a lot of things were kept hush-hush. The debate that's occurring now is beginning to occur publicly because both sides believe they're right, and they believe they have enough support to carry their way. So it's a little bit different than the situation we saw in Plymouth with John Lyford. On February 9th, 1637, another general court session began, and the merits of Mr. Wilson were debated and approved, and that was his speech. This shows that Winthrop's people were still in the majority in the colony. Mr. Wheelwright, who was a part of the Hutchinson faction, now known as the Free Grace Advocates, was accused of spreading sedition through his sermons. During a court session, it comes out that Wheelwright proceeded in a sermon to call opponents of his doctrine antichrists, and that's what ends up bringing him before the court. Let's have a look at the writing. So after much debate, the court adjudged him guilty of sedition and also of contempt, for that the court had appointed the fast as a means of reconciliation of the differences, and he purposely set himself to kindle and increase them. Wheelwright was convicted but not sentenced, and it may have had to do with the fact that the Church of Boston was backing John Wheelwright. On May 1st, 1637, the colony heard from those in Connecticut on the progress of the war they started. Let's have a look at the writing. Those of Connecticut returned answer to our public letters, wherein they showed themselves unsatisfied about our former expedition against the Pequots, and their expectation of a further prosecution of the war, to which they offered to send men, and signified their unpreparedness to declare themselves in the matter of government in regard to their engagement to attend the answer of the gentlemen of Saybrook about the same matter. So Saybrook and Connecticut are separate colonies at this time, and the Saybrook colony is getting hit harder with Pequot attacks. But as you could see from that letter, there's an expectation amongst the Connecticut colonists that the Massachusetts Bay colony is going to commit a little bit more here. They're expecting help. And Massachusetts Bay is busy in the middle of this religious debate. Now, 9 days would pass before the Massachusetts Bay colony would respond. Let's have a look. Captain Underhill was sent to Saybrook with 20 men to keep the fort, both in respect of the Indians and especially of the Dutch, who by their speeches and supplies out of Holland gave cause of suspicion that they had some design upon it. The men were sent at the charge of the gentlemen of Saybrook, and lent by order of the council here, for fear any advantage should be taken by the adverse party through the weakness of the place. In the spring of 1637, a colonist by the name of Mr. Haynes left the colony for Connecticut. 10 days after he left, a letter came back describing the situation there. Let's have a look. We received a letter from him and others, being then at Saybrook, that the Pequots had been up the river at Wethersfield and had killed 6 men, being at their work, and 20 cows and a mare, and had killed 3 women and carried away 2 maids. So the Pequots are attacking the Connecticut colony, and they're attacking at John Oldham's hometown of Wethersfield. At the same time, Edward Winslow of the Plymouth colony was visiting and discussing the situation regarding the Pequots. Let's have a look at the writing. Mr. Winslow was sent from the governor and council of Plymouth to treat with us about joining against the Pequots. He declared first their willingness to aid us, but that they could not do anything till their general court, which was not till the first Tuesday in the 4th month. Then he made some objections. He objected to 1, our refusal to aid them against the French, 2, our trading at Kennebec, which we discussed in a prior episode, 3, the injury offered them at Connecticut by those of Windsor in taking away their land there, and 4, their own poverty. And by number 4, their own poverty, it seems like Massachusetts Bay wasn't totally willing to aid the Plymouth colonists in whatever economic issues they were facing at that time. So Winslow comes there to discuss the alliance against the Pequot, but there's these things that need to be addressed first. The colony responded that they did not wish aid, but to join against a common enemy. The case with the French was Plymouth's private problem. The colony was unaware of anyone else trading at the Kennebec, and the land ownership issues in Connecticut were outside the control of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It's important to note that the Massachusetts Bay Colony was having an easier time getting the Narragansett as allies than they were the Plymouth colonists. Winslow left without an agreement, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony followed up with a letter encouraging Plymouth to join their efforts, and insinuated that if they did not, and the colonists prevailed over the Pequot, there might be ill feelings from the colonists of the Massachusetts Bay Colony towards those of Plymouth. Interesting. On May 17th, 1637, the General Court met at Newtown and had elections for governor. The divisions were apparent, as Henry Vane's faction did not want to have an election, but they were overruled, and John Winthrop was elected governor. Winthrop summarizes the events of the day in a writing. Let's have a look. There was great danger of tumult that day, for those of that side grew into fierce speeches, and some laid hands on others. But seeing themselves too weak, they grew quiet. Wow, so the Puritan divisions got so bad, and Henry Vane, swept into those Puritan divisions, was no longer governor. He loses an election to John Winthrop. So John Winthrop is governor again, but Plymouth and even Connecticut have not committed to join them against the Pequots. The assault at Weatherfield would change all that, and we'll talk about it more next time on Historical Context.